in 1513. Auchinleck is from Gaelic, Achad na Liech, and means field of the flagstones, and Gaelic was well established in Ayrshire by the 12th century. And at the Lugar Water, below the old castle, the first castle, there are large sandstone flagstones. So it's pretty sort of obvious where it got its name. Right, wait till I see if I can work this. There we are, thank you. Okay, so Auchinleck House is the starting point for this talk, and it's no doubt familiar to you all, or most of you. I could spend the whole time talking about the house, but not today. Fortunately, it's been saved from deterioration and is a popular holiday rental through the Landmark Trust. I often meet people that are staying there when I walk the estate, and they always get a little potted history of the place, whether they want it or not. So Auchinleck House was built by Alexander Boswell, the 8th Laird of Auchinleck, sometime between 1755 and 1760. And I'll refer to him as Lord Auchinleck. And he was the father of James Boswell, the diarist, and I'll refer to him as Boswell, the diarist, obviously, of Samuel Johnston. Now, at one time, the design was thought to be by the Adam brothers, who built nearby Dumfries House round about the same time. Lord Auchinleck records a visit to the Earl of Dumfries in 1753, and he says, where politics and house building made the subject of conversation at a plentiful dinner. Auchinleck House is most likely to have been built as an artisan house, designed by Lord Auchinleck himself in consultation with his master craftsman. There's a wage slip of 1760, and it shows a John Johnston as being likely the person behind the design. Now, Johnston had worked in Duff House and at Haddle House, and was a protege of the Clarks of Pennycook. And they had Mavis Bank, that wonderful house that has been deteriorating so badly over the last few 100 years, really, but it's now been saved again by the Landmark Trust, so it's been saved for the nation. So Auchincruive House, Roselle and Drungan House were all built around the same time. There was window tax paid in the house in 1760 for 31 windows. And in May 1762, James Bowie, the slater and heir, he was paid for 18,000 Easdale slates at £1 9 per 1,000. So I'll leave you to work out the maths. The 4 wings that flank the house weren't added until about 1773, 1775. And originally they were whitened, so that would sort of tone everything down. And Boswell remarked that the new whitened pavilions gave a fine air to the place. Right, let's see if we can work this time. Ah, yes. We're on a roll. The pediment of the house shows exceptionally fine carvings, music, the martial arts, scales for justice, a sceptre for authority, and the serpent-entwined staff of Aesculapius. Had to practice that, Aesculapius. Yep. The healer, all grouped around a hooded falcon, which is the Boswell family crest. And you'll see lots of that if you frequent the coffee shop. The workers during the renovation referred to it as the hooded parrot. The inscription is from Horace, and it means, what you seek is here in this remote place if you can only keep a balanced disposition. And Horace draws a comparison between Auchinleck and Ulybris, a remote town north of Rome, and he extols the virtues of a quiet life in one's home region. So his idea of fulfillment is at home in a rural retreat. I know it's sort of everything you need or everything you seek is here. So though the bright lights of London and the glitterati, that's another mouthful, appealed to Boswell more than Auchinleck. As a young man, Boswell described Auchinleck as a most sweet, romantic place. And near the end of his life, in a letter to his son, he describes it as one of the most delightful places upon earth. hope you can sort of see the detail of the map okay. Most designed landscapes contain a mansion house. Well, we'll use this wee thing here. There we are. The mansion house is here. Okay, as a focal point, as well as stables and the coach houses, which are the offices, and a home farm, which is the mains. Other structures can include estate boundary walls, gates and gate lodges, temples, hermitages, grottos, ducats, eye catchers, ice houses, chapels, burial grounds, conservatories, ferneries, pergolas, flagpoles, sundials, statuary, and so forth. And on the Auchinleck estate, we find lots from this list. From August 1762, when the family moved into the new house, work was done to enhance the landscape. In a letter of July 1763, Bruce, who's the overseer of the estate, Bruce reports of landscaping about the new house, the levelling of ground, and the construction of ha-has. The fields of Barnsdale were included in the policies of the new mansion, and Barnsdale is just down here. It's just off the map. Okay, so this was all Barnsdale land. So there'll be lots of levelling of rig and furrow, and which could reach quite a height and corresponding depth. In Scotland, and rarely in other parts of the United Kingdom, the wooded and landscaped environs of a country house are referred to as the policies. From the Latin politus, meaning refined or embellished, and this distinguishes the style of planting from the wider rural landscape. So landscape gardening emerged in the early 1700s with hedges, statues, fountains, and ornate carpets of floral design, replacing the more formal, symmetrical European style of the 1600s, with its alleys and parterres near the house. And this new landscaping usually included a lake, sweeps of rolling lawns, groves, trees, and classical temples or Gothic ruins. So it was a picturesque architecture to create a pastoral landscape. And seemingly, this required fewer gardeners and was easier to maintain. So the completion of Auchinleck House coincided with these new ideas, and Lord Auchinleck took full advantage of them. Ideas like those of Capability Brown, who simplified the garden, got rid of the geometry of flower beds near the house, and replaced with low rolling lawns even, and extensive views to isolated groups of trees, making the landscape seem even larger. And we see this here with the parkland to the front of the house. And if we note the clump of trees on the right and on the left, now gone, there's only a mound. So we've got that clump of trees is still there in the front park. All the trees here have gone, and it's just a mound. And there's actually a sundial here, and there's a stone here as eye catchers. What happened to the stone? Don't know. Don't know if it was an ancient stone or whatever. It's gone, and the sundial has disappeared as well. And although the fashion was to create an ideal landscape with artificial lakes and dams and canals, Auchinleck didn't need artificial waterways, as there was the Lugar water, and much would be made of the Dipple burn. Lugar is Brittonic, and it means the bright, shining river. And Dipple is from Gaelic, Du for black and Pol for the burn, so it's the black burn. So we've got the bright, shining river, and we've got the black burn for the waterways. And still on, talking about waterways, we also had the Swan Loch and a nearby curling pond, which is now drained. There's also reference to pike in Lord Auchinleck's fish pond at 10 Shillingside. This is an interesting feature, as the watercourse on the North Drive has been substantially altered to run along the bottom of 10 Shillingside. And at one point it continued to and beyond the fish pond. And the pond's still there, albeit without water. And you can see traces of the former watercourse at certain times of the year. To digress for a moment, not me, there was a racecourse in the belt of trees at the top of 10 Shillingside, and that was called the Long Avenue. So the landscape epitomised the latest innovations in garden fashion and the new agricultural improvements, as well as indulging the passions of the Boswell family. And more recent changes in the landscape are the horse jumps from when Auchinleck had their annual horse trials. And that is what the front park looks like today. And now we've got the back of the house. This is the rear park. Note the lawn next to the house. Can you see all right, or do you need me to use this little machine? Or are you all right? Okay, we've got the lawn, we've got the parkland, we've got the ha-ha there. Okay. And it's full of sort of really incredibly special old trees as well. Parkland's usually maintained as a permanent grassland for the grazing of cattle, sheep, horses, or cut as hay, and it can be open, either unplanted or planted ornamentally with single trees or groups of trees. And this is the ha-ha that runs along here. You can't see the road, and that's it there from the road. And that's some of the trees. Trees have been planted on the estate for many centuries. The woodlands which surrounded the mansion were no recent innovation and were known as the braidwood, the broadwood. Woodland policies in Scotland are usually comprised of mixed species, broadleaves such as oak, ash, beech, elm, sycamore and lime, and conifers such as Scots pine, spruce, larch, possibly with a mixture of more ornamental species such as horse chestnut and copper beech. Rhododendron and laurel may be planted along drives and walks, together with specimen trees such as sequoia, Douglas fir and monkey puzzle, all to add a bit of visual interest. Receipts at Yale show that trees were planted by their tens of thousands under both Lord Auchinleck and Boswell. And Lord Auchinleck enjoyed pruning. One of his favourite recreations in the country was to prune with his own hands the trees he himself had planted. Beginning at 5 a.m, he wrought with his knife and chisel every spare hour. And the planting of the trees had been undertaken since the early 17th century. In a letter to Bruce of January 1779, we learn that David Boswell, the 6th Laird, in 1666, planted 5 young firs in the brae down to the old castle above the washing green, 3 of which were still standing and in vigour in May 1766. And Boswell, like his forebears, was an enthusiastic planter, even before he became Laird. In 1771, he noted, "I have been serving an apprenticeship with my father in the art of pruning, and I hope in time to be a skillful and diligent guardian of the trees here." And of course, timber was a useful commodity and a valuable source of income. Andrew Wright, who wrote The Present State of Husbandry in Scotland, visited Ayrshire in 1777 and 1778, and he remarked, "Lord Auchinleck is a most assiduous planter and equally careful of his trees, though indeed, in that wet climate, they require little else but to be fenced from cattle. His enclosures are extensive, and his own farm mostly in grass. Upon his broad walks lined with trees, and consequently well sheltered, hay is commonly taken." In a letter of November 1783, Boswell says, "I wish to have the park in front of the house and Broomholm ploughed, but take care of the trees." And this is the mantra that we hear often. So that's the rear park today, with the road and the ha-ha going down to the garden, and then we've actually got lovely views of Arran when it doesn't rain. So the improvement in farming also had a knock-on effect on landscape garden design, as well as a radical change to the appearance of the countryside. Changes in agricultural practice from the dearth of the 1690s until the second half of the 18th century were almost imperceptible. Farming was the traditional run-rig system with a simple crop rotation, and before Lord Auchinleck's time, there were few enclosures. In a letter of 1766 from Bruce to Boswell, he says, "We still go boldly on with dividing and enclosing the farms. Orders were given to enclose fields and hedges and to plant shelter belts. And what couldn't be raised on the estate itself, it was purchased from Sampson's in Kilmarnock. And this is Tam Sampson, the seed merchant, who was immortalised by Burns in Tam Sampson's elegy. And we also know that Lord Auchinleck exchanged lands with neighbours to consolidate his holdings. Lord Kames, a friend of Boswell, published The Gentleman Farmer in 1766, and fellow landowners such as the Earls of Eglinton and Loudon took serious interest in agricultural reform, and a general spirit of improvement characterised the age. Boswell also sought advice of Alexander Fairlie, factor to the Earl of Eglinton, and a leading expert on improving farming. And Fairlie visited Auchinleck several times, and Boswell implemented his schemes, known as the Fairlie rotation, letting farms and grass as they became vacant and persuading tenants to accept new terms. So there was a huge change in farming, huge changes in the landscape design, and it was just an exciting time all round. And we know that as well as building the new house and landscaping the policies, roads were constructed. And this one is of the scenic sweeping road from the North Drive. And some of these pictures are actually taken from the house because I wanted you to see what it was like for the people that were living in the house. Lord Auchinleck had a 3-mile road constructed from Auchinleck Kirk to the house, and he called it his Via Sacra. And it's still in existence with its beech and its oak trees for Boswell, beech and oak for Boswell, fully mature trees, now unfortunately coming to the end of their lives, and that last storm didn't do any of them any good. And his tenants, as part of their tack, were expected to help with the upkeep of the roads. A 1793 tack for Drumfork states that the tenant, Thomas Guthrie, was to provide a horse and a cart and a man to assist in repairing the road from the house of Auchinleck to the church, or to pay 2 shillings instead. Obviously, there's lots more about Drumfork in my book. Plug. Had to get it in somewhere. And there were several bridges as well built across the Dipple Burn. So ideas were copied and borrowed from other grand houses. When Boswell was in London in 1763, Bruce suggested that he might purchase seeds for trees and flowers, as well as engraved plans for finishing about the new house. Several walkways were created during this period, taking full advantage of the natural beauty and the romantic aspect of the estate. All designed landscapes are built upon the natural landscape, and many of the greatest designed landscapes exploit the natural scenery. So we're going to take a look at one of them, Ladies' Walk, from the new house of Auchinleck to the gardens which remain beside the old place, the earlier but not the earliest castle on the estate. So we leave the house, and this is where the conservatory was. The rampant rhododendrons have done their bit, but it was possibly Victorian. Due to the mass production of iron and glass, glass houses and conservatories became a feature of many Victorian gardens. And most of the bridges are quite utilitarian, but this is the one from the North Drive to the house, and it's quite decorative, and it's known as the Iron Bridge. It wasn't built when the house was built, but it wasn't built till about the 1830s. And seemingly the Landmark Trust spent about £1 million in this bridge. The metal infill has all been replaced, as much of the original metalwork still lies in the Dipple below. And on the hillside to the right, if we went under the bridge and up to the right, on the hillside there's the graves of Patrick Boswell and his wife. And seemingly that was one of his favourite spots. He liked to come down there of an evening with a wee glass of wine and enjoy the beauty of the place. So we're going to turn left before crossing the bridge and head towards the summer house. So down through the trees and the beautiful views. The summer house was built about the same time as the new mansion and was highly praised by Dr. Johnston on his visit in 1773. It's hewn out of the sandstone by the Dipple Burn, and it's about 15.5 feet wide and 11 feet high. It's a central arched doorway flanked by windows and has a coffered ceiling and moulded cornices, and it gives the impression of an elegant 18th century drawing room. and the view from here is beautiful. Lord Auchinleck was very enthusiastic about this and his other grottos. And further along from the summer house is the ice house, and again it's a cave which has been carved into the red sandstone that forms the side of the gorge. This is the Sandstone Bridge, another utilitarian bridge built around the same time. Historic Environment Scotland neatly avoids dating the bridges and instead use the term period unassigned. And apologies that I'm photobombing this, but I can explain later. So that's the utilitarian Sandstone Bridge.
What's the water underneath the bridge? Is that the Dipple?
That's the Dipple, yep. And this is one of the burns that's actually running into the Dipple here. This is the Gothic Bridge. So we continue to walk and we look across to this beautiful bridge. And this embodies the Gothic romantic ambience that Lord Auchinleck was trying to create at no doubt great expense. It has tall pointed arches and a corbelled string course. Corbelled means jutting, and a string course is a continuous horizontal band. Every day is a school day. It's a tall pointed arch, and it's in the Gothic style. And it's similar in style to Wallace's Cave, more of which later, and is the highlight of a picturesque walk. It's sometimes referred to as 10 Shillingside Bridge, as it's adjacent to the 10 Shillingside lands. And the remains of the Ferm Tune are still there and quite substantial at 10 Shillingside, so archaeologists would have a field day. And Alexander Peden, Prophet Peden's brother, farmed at 10 Shillingside, so he would have known the great beauty of the area. Peden's Cave is further up the Lugar Water, but who's to say that Peden didn't hide in the Ice Cave or the Deer Cave? There's quite a few caves, so I'm sure he had many that he would hide in. Boswell mentions a path from the summer house to the Gothic Bridge, and it can still be traced in parts. And just beyond the Gothic Bridge is another picturesque ravine. And this picture doesn't do it justice, but you can see the Dipples running at the bottom there, and we've got the ravine going down, and there's actually remnants of a stone bridge across the top of this. So if you do walk the estate, this will be familiar. This is what's now called the Gorge Walk. On the left, we have it as it looks today. 20 years ago, when I walked my dog there, that was what it looked like before they spruced it up. So as I say, Lord Auchinleck didn't need to manufacture waterways in the fashion of Capability Brown. He did his natural gorge. And this is part of Ladies' Walk, is now known as the Gorge Walk. I met a gentleman one day, and he stopped to chat, as you do, and he couldn't understand why it was called the George Walk, because there's a wee sign that says Gorge Walk. So I didn't have the heart to tell him to go to Specsavers. In fact, we quite often call it the George Walk now, don't we? We're just going for the walk along the George Walk. And this is the gorge viewed from above. And this is it from below. If you remember, during COVID, the weather was exceptionally sunny, and the water levels in the Dipple and the Lugar were well down, and we spent many hours exploring the Dipple from the basin, and that's why I was photobombing the earlier slide. We had our sticks to wander about and see if there was any puddles that were too deep. I only fell in once, but it was great fun. It was amazing what we found when we were walking along the bottom of the Dipple. We found this little niche. That's it there, carved into the rock. That's a wee close-up of it. We presume it's for a statue, because this 18th century landscape, they had statues everywhere and viewpoints. So our guess it's for a statue, but possibly lighting. So we're open to suggestions. Okay. And then just further along from this little niche we came to a gate or a hurdle. You can see that this carved into the stonework. So it's been a gate, and this is it from the dipple looking up, and this is it from above looking down. So we're just not sure whether it's to keep something out or to keep something in, but there's a large grassy area beside it. So it might have been some sort of picnic area. And above this grassy area where this gate or hurdle is, there's obviously something going on. There's a gate, there's something, there's a flat area, but right above this, there's a tumble of red sandstone. So there's possibly a collapsed grotto or some sort of folly. And this is the collapsed grotto. Or is it? Because we've got the badger set here. So they can be very, very old. So is it natural sandstone tumble from the badger earthworks, or was something there? There's a reference to an Auchinleck temple, now lost. In a letter of May 1783 to Bruce, mention is made of the sale of wood near Auchinleck temple, which is probably some sort of grotto. Macpherson's poems of Auchin were published in 1762 and were incredibly popular. Macpherson claimed to have found a previous unknown manuscript, the epic poem telling the story of Fingal, a 3rd century king, written by Auchin, Fingal's son. And critics quickly began to question the authenticity of Macpherson's claims and pointed to inconsistencies in the text. They questioned the translations. Some suggested that there was a team of writers helping him. Others claimed he'd invented it all. And Samuel Johnston was an absolute huge critic, especially in works such as A Journey to the Western Islands of Scotland. It was even suggested that Johnston's motivations for travelling to the Highlands was to expose Macpherson as a fraud. But it was so popular, and it gave rise to a number of sites around the country. There was Fingal's Cave in Staffa, Auchin's Cave in Glencoe, and of course we had Auchin's temple in Auchinleck. But Auchin's temple exemplifies the move away from the English fashion of capability brown. And now we've got the natural, rugged Scottish scenery in vogue. So natural landscapes were allowed to dominate and were embellished rather than tamed. So we continue to walk down the dipple and we come to the stairs. Can you see the stairs? And then we've lost them there, and then we've got more here. Okay, so if you look across the gorge, you can see the steps carved into the sandstone leading to a waterfall. And possibly there was some sort of viewpoint erected. Unfortunately, the rhododendrons block any view of the waterfall from above. We did try and explore these steps, but it's really steep and it's really dangerous, and you would need a rope. And I know somebody that's bought a rope to do this, but we've not tried it yet. But it's just amazing. And that is the waterfall. It doesn't look particularly spectacular, but the noise it makes from above on a rainy day is incredible. And then we reach the high bridge. So we go along, continue along the gorge walk, the ladies walk, and come to the high bridge. Again, this is a utilitarian bridge with the roadway sweeping round and skirting the bottom of the parkland and heading to the stables and the house. Now, the original ladies walk was slightly further down the path that's there now. And the ladies would not need to cross the bridge as the remnants of an underpass still survive. And here we have it from the east, where it's very, very tumbled down, and there's a bit more remains from the west. So this is underneath the high bridge, so the ladies could walk and they didn't have to be in the way of carriages or other people. And that's me, not photobombing, but just giving you an idea of the height and the width of the underpass. Oops, what's happened here? Oops, hang on. Lost my place. That's it. So that's the high bridge from the dipple. It's really, really, really beautiful. And as we come out the underpass, this is what the Ladies' Walk looks like. You can still make it out, and there's actually a wee collapsed stone bridge not much further along. It didn't come up very well in the photograph, so I didn't bother putting it in. But I put this one in. This is the remains of yet another stone bridge over a ravine. And this must have been totally spectacular. This ravine has got huge trees at the top. It's been changed about now because the path's gone through and it goes right down to the Dipple. That's the tree that's across it. That's the wall that I've just shown you, and that's the way right down to the water. So that's the bridge, and that's the tree across the top. So it's quite an interesting feature as we're walking. And this will be familiar to many of you. The Ladies' Walk continues to skirt the Dipple with treacherous drops in places and reaches the old place and its gardens. There appears to be no formal gardens laid out close to the new house, as this was considered unfashionable. So being further from the new mansion probably saved this garden that we're going to see. There's been gardens around the old place since it was built, and the formal gardens to the east could be about the same period. And I'll show you a wee map of them shortly. This is what's left of the old place. This is hanging by a thread, it's still there. So this is looking towards that window, this is looking out of this window, and if we go behind that wall here, we've got a doorway, and this has had a staircase that's fallen. So that's sort of a bit of what remains of the old place. And that's what it looked like. This is a drawing of 1791 by Hooper, taken from the gross illustration of 1789. Wee bit of artistic license. The old place was built in the early 17th century. James Boswell, the fourth Laird, erected a tower house in the Scots Renaissance style. And originally it was a T shape, and his son David made additions to create the L shape. So originally it was this T shape, and then they built the wing on here to make it an L shape. And close by was a chapel dedicated to St. Vincent, and Boswell believed that this demolished chapel provided building material for the old place extension. Boswell says, "Not far from the old castle is a spot of consecrated earth, on which may be traced the foundations of an ancient chapel, and where in old times was the place of graves for the family. It grieves me to think that the remains of the sanctity here, which were considerable, were dragged away and employed in building a part of the house of Auchinleck of the Middle Age, which was the family residence, till my father erected that elegant modern mansion of which Dr. Johnson speaks so handsomely. Perhaps this chapel may one day be restored." So, I don't know, I sometimes think it's a wee bit older than that, but I feel Thomas Boswell would have wanted to make a statement in the landscape when he arrived, but it can be discussed later. So this is what the old place gardens look like today. Okay. Beech hedges existed for many years, and prior to this, possibly a hawthorn hedge. And this is the beech hedge. This is looking up from the old place, and this is looking down, and you can actually see there's two beech hedges at this point, and this was probably a walkway, more of a utility walkway for the gardeners and people to avoid seeing the ladies and enjoying the peace and quiet of the garden. Evidence shows that in January 1791, hawthorns were to be grown rather than vegetables and to be used in hedging the garden. And Boswell had actually plans to build a high garden wall with stone from the old place after it had collapsed in a storm in December 1792. In a letter of May 1793 to Gibb, he says, "And to make the garden wall at least 18 feet high and to line it with brick." And a month later he wrote I wish to delay building the garden wall until next year, but Robert McCrone may go on leading the stones, and Robert McCrone was the tenant in Gibston, so he had been tasked with sorting out the stones and taking them away. Where they went to and what they were used for, who knows, but I'm sure they were put to good use somewhere. And this is the old place. So this is it looking from the back view. So the roof, the floors and the fireplaces of the old place must have been recycled after the new house was built. A building that has withstood the ravages of time for nearly 200 years doesn't fall down in 30 years unless there's something amiss. In 1790, Boswell had wanted to know the state of the old place, and the previous year had written that although unroofed, it might easily be made habitable. So after the stairs of the old house collapsed in the storm of 1792, Alexander Boswell, Boswell's son, viewed the ruins with Gibb, and he composed a poem, The Swallow's Lament on the Downfall of the Old House of Auchinleck. And I have a copy here if anybody wants to read it later on. In 1793, in the January, just after the storm, Boswell wrote that it was regrettable but not surprising that it had fallen, and he was just glad that no one had been hurt. And in February, Gibb wrote that the old house continues to tumble down. In consequence, no work can be carried out in the courtyard. So it's such a sad demise for a beautiful house. This is actually my favourite picture because you can see just what it looked like. And of course, the window that's just hanging in there is that one there. It's still there.
How far apart are the two houses? What's the distance from the old place to the new mansion?
The voice. I can throw my voice. Yeah, it's a fair bit. It's down near the Lugar and the Dipple, and it's up in the high. But yeah, half a mile. Thank you, Andrew. So this is the map of we've got the old place here, okay, and this is the bowling green, and this is Greenfoot, okay. So the earliest layout of the garden appears to be the bowling green at the north of the old place, looking towards the Spanish chestnut, and you can just make out the Spanish chestnut in full bloom here. In full bloom? You don't get trees in full bloom, do you? In full foliage? Full leaf, thank you. But you knew what I meant. And south to the green is the Greenfoot Burn and Greenfoot Cottage, and that formerly had been the Mains farm. So bowling goes back at least to the reign of James IV. In 1501, there's mention of a green at Holyrood, and it was banned by James IV as it was a distraction from archery. He wanted his men practicing their archery, not playing bowls. In 1595, Glasgow banned the playing of both golf and bowls on a Sunday, and seemingly in Edinburgh, until the early 19th century, almost every laird's house had a bowling green. And it also looks as if croquet might have been played, because the boy in the previous slide seems to be holding a croquet mallet. Croquet mallet, oh, jeepers. I should have had that glass of wine earlier. There's the wee one. With his croquet mallet. There we are. And again, we've got that window. And this is the bowling, on the left, this is the bowling green. We're looking from the Spanish chestnut to the old place, and then we're looking from the old place to the Spanish chestnut. The Spanish chestnut was introduced into Britain during Roman times, and it was incredibly popular during the reign of Mary, Queen of Scots. And this Spanish chestnut, several old oaks and yews probably date back to the early 1600s. Now, where the medieval garden was situated is still a mystery, possibly in the vicinity of the old place, or possibly further down the slope towards the original castle. The medieval castle dates back to the 1300s, and I'm not actually going into the medieval Auchinleck landscape today, or you'd be here for another hour, so that's a talk for another time. But the round the old castle, and it's just fascinating landscape. In fact, Andrew and I were exploring it at the weekend and taking lots of pictures, and there's just so much going on, it's unbelievable. But I couldn't manage to do the medieval and the 18th century all in one talk. So here we have the map of the old place and the 17th century gardens. 17th century gardens were generally surrounded by high walls and grouped around the main house, and garden layouts were frequently geometrical and symmetrical, with Italian, French and Dutch influences evident at different times. So the garden to the east of the old place was formal and set out in this geometric shape with the flower beds and the trees. However, this old garden could now, in the 18th century, be incorporated into the new fashion of pleasure grounds, and having a genuine ruined castle would only enhance the romantic aspect of it all. And the ruins also emphasised that the Boswell family was a family with a pedigree, and it was a statement of their status and longevity. Now, pleasure grounds typically included lawns and terraces and rockeries, shrubberies, parterres, bedding schemes, herbaceous borders, bowling greens, tennis courts, and planting could be formal or informal, often with a high proportion of exotic and ornamental species. And sometimes it was thematic, with plants chosen for their colour or for their scent or for their type, like a rose garden. And as these spaces were intended for recreation, they might incorporate shady walks and mazes and sheltered corners with seating. So this surely describes this garden. So we have the outline of the ornamental garden with its 6 compartments. And we know that exotic species were collected, and plants, both flower, fruit and vegetable, borrowed from other great gardens. The Spanish chestnut was an early introduction. However, the garden boasts Douglas firs, introduced to Britain in 1827, a monkey puzzle tree, that's a Chilean pine, introduced in the 1850s, the giant sequoia or the Wellingtonia in 1853, and of course the Japanese knotweed and the rhododendrons were introduced in about the 1760s, and they've rampaged through the garden. There was a great interest in different species, and lairds would exchange seedlings and seeds from their estates. And there's a letter from Lord Hynford to Alexander Boswell in 1753, and it says, "Dear Mr. Boswell, I had the pleasure of your letter of the 28th past, which I would have answered sooner, but that I waited till I should be able myself to go to my nurseries to see what plants were fit to be moved. And I have accordingly marked a certain number of them, which you will find in the closed list, with an order to my operator to deliver them to your gardener or MD that you shall send. And I have likewise a little bag of Siberia cedar cones, and some archangel red and white turnip seed, and some cabbage seed for your potager, which I will give you when we meet in Edinburgh." So they're all swapping things willy-nilly. In 1766, Bruce received a parcel of seeds of the strawberry tree, presumably brought from Corsica. And Boswell noted the Corsican mountains are covered with the arbutus or strawberry tree, which gives a rich, glowing appearance as far as the eye can reach. So it's an inedible shrub, and it's absolutely nothing to do with strawberries. And in 1784, Boswell hopes that Bruce will visit him in Edinburgh, as he would enjoy the botanical gardens that had been founded in 1670 and recited at Leith Walk, as well as the policies of Prestonfield, the home of Sir Alexander Dick, and Duddingston House, the home of the Earl of Abercorn. And in July 1788, Bruce mentions the arrival of the flower and leaf of the tulip tree from the Archbishop of York's garden. And Boswell had dined with him at Bishopthorpe Palace in York and toured his famous gardens. And the tulip tree is a species of magnolia. So they were all swapping everything about. And we've got the utility garden to the south of the old place with the greenhouses and everything. And we've got a list of what was grown in the kitchen or the utility garden: cabbages, cauliflower, kale, leeks, white peas, kidney beans, artichokes, potatoes, rhubarb, strawberries, raspberries, gooseberries, blackcurrants, apples, pears and plums. In December 1778, mention is made of some Prestonfield apple and pear trees to be planted at Auchinleck. And in 1782, Bruce is to remember to attend to the Longueville pear trees, one of several pear tree varieties reputedly originating from the gardens and abbeys of monasteries of pre-Reformation days and originally came from France. Some say it was introduced to Scotland by the Black Douglas in the 1300s, or Mary Queen of Scots and her mother Mary of Guise. Now, we've been down at the old place, we've looked at all the gardens there, and we're going to jump back up to the new house. Okay? We've been concentrating on the old place garden, and however, in the mid-19th century, it became fashionable again for formal terracing and flower gardens to be reintroduced around the house. And this map shows the formal garden between the house and the lawn. So here we've got our flower beds and everything. And it's in keeping with the changing garden tastes of the 19th century. Alexander Boswell, Boswell's son, was a close friend of Sir Walter Scott, who had written an essay on landscape gardening in 1828. And he had called for the reinstatement of flower gardens near to the mansion house. And there's no trace of this garden by the 1895 Ordnance Survey map, and there's no trace of it on the ground either, because we've tramped across it. Now we've gone back to our garden at the old place and have one of the very few photos that seem to have survived. This photo is possibly fairly modern, but it gives an idea of the Victorian garden with exotic plants and trees. And Helen Stephen, in her History of Auchinleck, which was published in 1889, wrote a rather flowery, excuse the pun, a flowery yet evocative description of the garden. The beautiful gardens of the modern mansion are beside its old-time predecessor, not enclosed by a high wall, as so many gardens of mansion houses are today, but with a low hedge of beech, beyond which one sees the grand old trees in all their beauty, lovely glimpses of woodland scenery, the Dipple Burn in its deep ravine, and the solemn pine trees on the hills. The garden is laid out with flowers and trees and walks of grass. Indeed, the flower beds are cut from the grass, and most of the garden is green. Flowering shrubs grow out of the greenness, and great trees stand stately here and there. Tall trees of box, whose growth must be of well nigh a century, are cut in fantastic Elizabethan shapes, and sweet old-fashioned flowers fill the air with their beauty. On the lawn in front of the castle stands a sundial, the finishing touch to a beautiful picture. Obviously, the sundial has been relocated. And this is a 1950s aerial photo. It's a bit grainy, but you can see that the gardens of the old place are still there, all in their symmetry, and the bowling green and the green foot in the front. Okay. And there's evidence that the garden was still operational in the 1950s. In fact, the garden was probably operational right up till they abandoned the big house in about 1962. And this is my new slide that Kay found for me last week. This is a stereogram of one of the greenhouses, and it was actually found in the Cumnock Connections, that vast tree for all the Cumnock folk, and it was in the entry for a William Mackintosh, who died in 1963, and he had been the head gardener at Auchinleck Estate. So that was actually sitting there in the Cumnock Connections bit of the website. So I grabbed it. A stereogram, seemingly, you're meant to focus one eye on one side, one eye on the other, and then it's meant to show you in 3D. Well, I've tried, but it just gives me a totally sore head. Yeah, and maybe that's why I can't see it going cross-eyed. But it's great, and look at all these grapes. Bordeaux, eat your heart out. And this is the garden today. So it's overgrown with Japanese knotweed and rhododendrons, but the original layout is still visible. And the prized trees and the exotic in their time, they're still growing. And flowers that once were contained in neat beds, they're still there. So naturalised species such as yew and box can actually serve as a useful indicator of old gardens which have been abandoned and which have returned to a semi-natural state. And here's some of the box that still survives. Here's our monkey puzzle tree and one of the giant sequoias. Some of the flowers that are there, don't ask me to name them. And the knotweed, and again, I'm just giving an idea of scale and size. There are several yew trees in and around the garden, and some, as I said, are of a great age. Some people think they mark the lost graves, but then surely they'd be nearer the chapel and the consecrated ground. In a letter of March 1791 to Gibb, Boswell says, "I'm glad to observe your caution as to cutting any trees without my express approbation. You're right as to the yews, which I had thought of planting at the old chapel foundation. It must not be done until I've built a stone wall to enclose them. The yews must be kept in the garden." So they never were planted round the old graveyard, but there's still plenty in the garden. So there are many walkways created in the designed landscape of Auchinleck House, and still popular is the walk to Wallace's Cave. If I had £1 for every person I've directed to Wallace's Cave, I'd be really rich. In 1768, Boswell had a superb grotto made at Corby Craig, near to the old castle. Now, is this the one that we know as Wallace's Cave, or is it a different one? But it's up high, it's in the crags, and it would be where the crow flies. So it's got a pointed Gothic door with a narrow window on one side. Inside, it's approximately 3.5 metres square, and it's got vaulted with moulded ribs rising from each corner to meet in the middle. At one time, it was thought to be medieval due to its design and location. It's now thought to be contemporary with the mansion house. And it's yet another example of the Boswells developing the natural beauty of the estate in line with contemporary tastes. But possibly it was an earlier cave that they've embellished. And the name is derived from a distant family link to William Wallace. The first recorded laird of Auchinleck, Nicol de Auchinleck, was reputedly related to William Wallace and had fought alongside him and is referenced in Blind Harry's epic poem, The Wallace. And again, as part of the designed landscape, a treacherous path winds its way from Wallace's Cave to the old castle. And then from the old castle, there's this path hewn from the sandstone with a sheer drop, but the views of the gorge are superb, and we've been to be looking towards the garden and the mature trees. I didn't walk that, it was far too scary, but it's there. During the Second World War, the landscape dramatically changed again when the house was made available to troops from the Free French, Canadian and Polish forces, and the men were encamped in rows of nissen huts on a lawn stretching as far as the ruins of the old place. The officers were billeted in the house, but the men were in the nissen huts. And this is the wall of the old place, and this is part of what's left of the huts. Just yeah. And you can still see traces of bullet damage in the walls of the pavilion. And the landscape continues to change. The coffee shop and the play park are a popular venue for many to relax and explore and enjoy the estate, and the marquee is available for weddings and functions. So the grandeur and the splendour of the drives, the pleasure walks and the structured planting, the age of improvement and beyond may have gone, but have not totally disappeared. The Auchinleck estate is still the most beautiful of places. Everything you want, everything you need, everything you seek is here. Horace was right. There we are. Thank you.